There's a moment in every man's journey where he realizes something powerful. Not every situation requires action. Sometimes the most dominant move is no move at all. When a woman pulls back, becomes unpredictable, tests your patience, or tries to shift the emotional power in her favor, most men respond with instinct instead of strategy. They chase. They over-explain. They apologize for things they didn't do wrong. They try to correct the imbalance in the exact moment they should hold their ground. But a stoic man, one who understands emotional power, does something radically different. He ignores her. Not out of anger, not out of ego, but out of wisdom. Because the moment you ignore her, not in a childish way, but in a grounded, self-contained way, something happens inside her psychology that she never shows on the surface. She begins to feel the weight of her own actions. She feels the absence of your attention. She feels the sudden shift in the emotional current she once controlled. And this is where everything changes. Because ignoring her doesn't break the connection. It reveals it. It shows you what the dynamic truly is. And it shows her the strength she didn't expect from you. The female mind is deeply responsive to contrast. When you were present, she felt secure. When you were available, she felt in control. But when you fall silent, calmly, confidently, intentionally, she enters an entirely different emotional environment. Her certainty fades. Her assumptions weaken. Her curiosity intensifies. She starts noticing details she overlooked before. She starts replaying conversations she brushed off. She starts wondering why the man who once gave her attention suddenly gives his attention to something far more important, himself. And this is where Stoic tactics come alive. Ignoring her is not a punishment. It's a recalibration. It resets your value in her eyes because it resets the emotional frame. When you ignore her, you are not closing the door. You are letting her walk toward it on her own. You are removing emotional pressure. You are removing your energy from a space where it was being undervalued. And in that space, she must face the truth she was avoiding, that your presence was something she relied on more than she admitted. This video isn't about childish games. It's about strategic emotional mastery. It's about understanding what happens inside her psychology when you stop feeding her ego, stop rescuing her emotions, stop validating her uncertainty, and instead step into your own self-control. Because when you ignore her from a place of strength, not insecurity, her entire mindset shifts. The distance she created starts working against her. The silence she used becomes uncomfortable. The emotional power she thought she had dissolves. And what happens next will surprise you because women react far more intensely to the absence of a grounded man than to the attention of one. If you're ready to understand why ignoring her is sometimes the most powerful move you can make, let's begin. Before we start, a quick reminder. The real transformation doesn't happen on YouTube. It happens inside the community. If these videos have opened your eyes, what's inside will rebuild your mindset completely. It's not just a course. It's a brotherhood. A private space where men master attraction, emotional control, and the psychology of power. You don't join for a month. You join for life. Every future course, book, and lesson is yours forever. No subscriptions, no limits. Just one decision that changes your direction. If you're serious about growth, discipline, and purpose, click the link below. Join the community. Enroll once, grow forever. Let's dive in. Section number 1. Why ignoring her isn't weakness, it's control. Ignoring a woman is often misunderstood. Most men think it's a childish tactic, a petty reaction, or a desperate attempt to get attention, but true Stoic ignoring, the kind rooted in self-control, emotional balance, and inner strength, is the opposite of weakness. It's the decision to stop participating in a dynamic that drains your value. It's the refusal to validate behavior that disrespects your energy. It's the commitment to your own peace over someone else's chaos. And when this kind of ignoring is done from a place of grounded masculinity, it becomes one of the most powerful moves you can make. You ignore her not to hurt her, but to protect yourself. You ignore her not to manipulate her, but to stabilize your emotions. You ignore her not to provoke a reaction, but to reclaim your inner equilibrium. Because here's the truth. When a woman pulls back, tests you, becomes inconsistent, or enters a phase of emotional confusion, she is indirectly asking one question. Can you stay centered even when I change my behavior? Most men can't. They collapse. They chase the validation they were previously receiving. They panic at the slightest sign of distance. They begin compensating with effort that makes them look insecure. This is the moment where attraction dies quietly because neediness replaces presence. But the Stoic man responds differently. He feels the shift, but he doesn't fight it. He recognizes her pulling back as an emotional wave, and instead of swimming against it, he becomes still within himself. He doesn't try to fix her mood or change her mind. He doesn't negotiate for attention. He doesn't bargain for closeness. He simply withdraws his energy, not completely disappearing, but stepping into a controlled silence that communicates strength instead of fear. This silence is what women feel most intensely, not loud anger, not passive-aggressive comments, not dramatic exits. Stoic silence, calm, emotionless, unbothered, is the most powerful mirror you can place in front of a woman's behavior. It forces her to evaluate her own actions. It forces her to confront the imbalance she created. It forces her to ask herself questions she wasn't ready to face. Did I misjudge him? Why isn't he reacting? Did he lose interest? Is he talking to someone else? Did he realize his worth? These thoughts don't emerge because you disappeared. They emerge because you didn't. You didn't chase. You didn't crumble. You didn't react. You simply refused to match her emotional chaos. Ignoring her from a place of strength doesn't reduce your value. It amplifies it. It shows that your emotions are not negotiable. It shows that your peace is non-refundable. It shows that your time and energy are earned, not handed out freely. And the moment she realizes this, the dynamic begins to shift. Because a woman cannot stay indifferent to a man who refuses to lose his center. This is not cruelty. This is not a game. This is self-respect in motion, and self-respect is the foundation on which all powerful Stoic tactics are built. Section number 2, how your absence activates her emotional instincts. When you ignore her from a place of strength, something begins to shift inside her psychology, something she doesn't show on the surface, something even she may not fully understand at first. Your absence activates emotional instincts that were dormant when you were fully available. These instincts are ancient, subconscious, and wired into how women evaluate a man's value, stability, and impact in their emotional world. The first instinct you trigger is curiosity, a powerful psychological force that fuels attraction. When you are present, she knew where to place you emotionally. When you pull back, she loses that clarity. Your absence becomes a question she can't immediately answer. It creates a gap in her internal narrative. She starts wondering why the man who once gave her access now gives her silence. She begins to replay conversations, analyze your behavior, and notice details she once overlooked. This curiosity is not logical, it's emotional, and emotions always lead the female mind before thoughts do. The second instinct activated is comparison. She begins comparing you to other men in her life or from her past. Most men react emotionally, respond impulsively, or chase attention when a woman pulls away. But you didn't. Your silence sets you apart. It highlights your emotional discipline. It shows you are not operating from fear. And this contrast elevates you in her mental hierarchy. You move from just another man to a man with mystery, inner strength, and restraint. A man who can't be easily predicted or controlled. The third instinct your absence triggers is value recalibration. When someone is always available, the mind naturally undervalues them. It's not intentional, it's human psychology. But when your presence suddenly becomes uncertain, her mind recalibrates. She realizes the emotional weight you held. She feels the gap your presence filled. She notices the subtle stability she took for granted. Women feel value most intensely when they feel the potential of losing it. Then comes emotional reflection, one of the most powerful stages. When you ignore her calmly, you return emotional responsibility to her. She must now reflect on her actions. She must now consider the effect of her distance. She must now wonder whether she pushed too far. This reflection often leads to the realization that your presence carried more significance than she admitted. But the most fascinating instinct activated by your absence is pursuit. Not always visible at first, not always direct, but always present beneath the surface. She may start watching your stories, liking old photos, dropping hints, sending small messages, or appearing more friendly. These are her ways of checking your emotional temperature without exposing her vulnerability. Your absence has awakened the part of her psychology that wants clarity, and the only way to get clarity is to move toward you. Your absence is not emptiness, it is psychological presence. A presence felt more deeply because it is no longer guaranteed. This is the power of Stoic detachment. It doesn't push her away. It silently pulls her closer through her own emotional instincts. Section number 3. The emotional imbalance. She didn't expect. When you ignore her from a place of grounded calm, something she never anticipated begins to unfold. The emotional imbalance she created by pulling back suddenly shifts back onto her. In the beginning, she believed she controlled the dynamic. She believed she dictated the pace. She believed her silence would place her in the position of emotional advantage. But the moment you stop reacting, the moment you stop feeding her distance with attention, all of that flips. What she intended for you begins happening to her instead. This imbalance isn't dramatic or loud. It's subtle, internal, and incredibly powerful. It starts with a growing sense of uncertainty. When she pulled away, she expected you to come closer. When you didn't, she loses the security she assumed. Now she's the one questioning the connection. She's the one wondering how you suddenly slipped out of her emotional grasp. She's the one replaying her decisions. And the more she thinks, the more the imbalance grows. The next stage of imbalance comes from ego disruption. Most women, consciously or not, rely on the confidence that a man's interest will remain steady even if hers fluctuates. It's not manipulation. It's emotional instinct. But when she pulls back and you respond by stepping into silence, her ego takes a hit. She begins to wonder if she miscalculated your attachment, your attraction, or your level of investment. This ego disruption becomes a catalyst for deeper emotional reactions because it challenges her perception of her own influence over you. Then comes the shift in emotional responsibility. Suddenly, she is the one carrying the weight of uncertainty, wondering how you feel, questioning if she pushed too far, debating whether she should reach out. This responsibility is something she never expected to bear, and it creates an internal tension that grows each day you remain calm and detached. The silence she used as a tool now becomes a mirror she can't avoid looking into. Another layer of imbalance emerges through the return of self-awareness. When she was pulling away, she wasn't evaluating her behavior. She was evaluating yours. But once you go silent, she is forced inward. She must look at her own actions, her own inconsistencies, her own assumptions. She begins asking herself questions she didn't ask before. Why did I pull back? Why did his silence affect me? Why do I care so much? These questions form the emotional groundwork for reconnection, not because she is desperate, but because she is becoming aware of her own desire. Finally, the imbalance triggers the emotional chase, the psychological need to restore the sense of stability she once had with you. But now restoring stability requires her effort, her initiative, her vulnerability. That shift is what creates the turning point because attraction thrives when effort becomes mutual, when she is no longer the passive observer but the active pursuer. This imbalance isn't punishment. It's the consequence of your emotional strength. It's the proof that your silence carries more weight than her distance ever did. Section number 4. Why your silence hits her harder than her ignoring you. A woman's silence may sting, but a man's silence, when done with emotional control, hits far deeper than she ever expects. Not because you are trying to hurt her, but because silence from a man carries a different psychological weight. When she ignores you, she often does it knowing that you will still be there, knowing that your interest will hold steady, knowing that your emotional availability won't change. But when you go silent, that certainty disappears. And losing emotional certainty is one of the most intense feelings a woman can experience. Your silence is powerful because it challenges the emotional safety she assumed she had with you. When a man is consistent, present, and engaged, a woman subconsciously builds an emotional structure around the predictability of his presence. She may not confess it, but she relies on it. She organizes her perception of him around it. She tests it at times, gently or harshly, to see if the structure holds. But when you go silent, that structure cracks. The foundation she thought was immovable suddenly feels unstable, and that instability is exactly what activates the deeper layers of her emotional attachment. Another reason your silence hits harder is because it exposes the truth about who actually holds emotional influence in the dynamic. When she ignored you, she thought she was displaying independence. But when you ignore her without anger or neediness, she realizes she is not the only one with emotional autonomy. She realizes you're not tied to her responses. She realizes that your attention is not guaranteed. And this realization shifts her entire internal dialogue. The power she thought she had slips back into your hands, not because you fought for it, but because you withdrew gracefully. Your silence also disrupts her emotional rhythm. Women are deeply sensitive to the emotional energy a man gives them. They feel the rise and fall of attention. They notice subtle changes. They respond instinctively to emotional shifts, even when they pretend they don't. When your silence interrupts her rhythm, her mind begins searching for balance. She becomes more alert, more aware, more emotionally receptive. Your silence becomes the missing note her emotional system is trying to resolve. Additionally, your silence carries weight because it creates space for reflection, space she didn't expect. When she ignored you, she wasn't thinking about consequences, but your silence forces her into introspection. It forces her to evaluate the relationship, her behavior, her intentions, and her feelings. It forces her to face the reality that you are not dependent on her involvement. Most importantly, it forces her to confront the fear that she may have misjudged your worth. But the deepest reason your silence hits harder is simple. Women respond more strongly to loss than to gain. When you were present, she felt comfortable. When you withdraw, she feels loss. Loss of attention, loss of emotional stability, loss of the potential connection. That loss creates urgency, an emotional pull that makes her consider reaching out, softening her tone, or reevaluating her choices. Your silence is not absence. It is presence magnified. It is strength quietly expressed. It is attraction intensified through restraint. Section number 5. The Stoic Shift. When you become the one she has to earn. There is a moment, subtle but monumental, when your silence forces a complete reversal in the dynamic. Before, she believed you were the one trying to earn her time, her attention, her affection. She assumed the emotional effort flowed from you toward her. But once you step back with stoic composure, once you pull your energy inward and stop rewarding her inconsistency, everything flips. Suddenly, you become the one she has to earn, and this psychological shift is the foundation of true attraction. A woman cannot feel deeply attracted to a man she doesn't respect, and she cannot respect a man who abandons his frame at the first sign of emotional pressure. By ignoring her calmly, not out of anger, but out of self-control, you demonstrate that your attention is not cheap. Your presence is not automatic. Your emotions are not easily swayed. This raises your value in her mind instantly, because the male attention she cannot control becomes the male attention she craves most. The Stoic shift also redefines the emotional stakes. When you were fully available, she felt safe, but she also felt unrushed. She knew you'd be there whenever she decided to engage. That comfort often leads to complacency, but when you pull back, that comfort becomes tension. And tension is the birthplace of desire. She begins to ask herself questions she never asked before. What does he think of me now? Did I misread his interest? Is he seeing someone else? Why doesn't he react to me like other men do? These questions sharpen her focus and soften her defenses. They turn her from passive observer into active participant. Another part of the shift is that she starts measuring her behavior differently. Instead of wondering what you're doing for her, she starts wondering what she's doing for you. This is the point where her emotional investment begins to grow. She becomes more thoughtful, more careful, more intentional. She may send a soft message, initiate conversation, show subtle vulnerability, or increase her effort in ways she previously didn't. These aren't random actions. They're signs she now feels she has something to lose. The Stoic shift also elevates your presence. You're no longer the man chasing clarity. You're the man creating it. You're no longer seeking reassurance. You're the one she must reassure. You're no longer emotionally dependent. You're emotionally sovereign. And women feel this difference immediately. Your silence doesn't make you disappear. It makes you stand out. It makes you more intriguing, more unpredictable, more masculine. It awakens her feminine instinct to move toward the man who does not move toward her out of need. But the most powerful part of this shift is internal. You begin to rediscover your value independent of her behavior. You realize her attention is not a measure of your worth. You realize her mood does not dictate your emotional state. You realize that a woman's temporary distance cannot shake a man who is rooted in his purpose, standards, and boundaries. This inner strength radiates outward, drawing her closer through your self-respect, not your pursuit. When you make this stoic shift, she doesn't just notice it, she feels it. And once she feels it, she adjusts accordingly. Section number 6. What she does. When she realizes you're not chasing. When your silence becomes consistent, grounded, and unbothered, something begins to shift inside her that she never planned for. She starts realizing slowly at first and then all at once that you are not going to chase her. You are not going to question her silence. You are not going to collapse emotionally because she pulled back. and this realization triggers a sequence of reactions. Some subtle, some bold, but all rooted in the same truth. Your self-control disrupts her expectations. The first reaction is increased awareness. She becomes hyper-attuned to any sign of your presence. She notices when you post, when you don't post, when you appear online, when you disappear. She picks up on cues she never cared about before. Your silence turns you into a question she can't answer, and the female mind is wired to seek closure. Your lack of reaction denies her that which only deepens her curiosity. The next reaction is self-reflection. When you don't chase, she's forced to evaluate her own behavior. She begins asking herself whether she misjudged you or acted too impulsively. She wonders if she underestimated your emotional independence. She replays her decisions, but this time, without the comfort of your guaranteed attention. This reflection often makes her more sensitive, more cautious, and more thoughtful toward you. Then comes testing behaviors. She may send small signals, not to reconnect fully, but to measure your emotional temperature. She may view your story instantly, like an old post, drop a casual comment, or send a light message out of nowhere. These are her ways of checking whether your silence is confidence or resentment, whether you're done or just composed, whether she still has emotional access to you. These micro moves tell you her mind is now engaged, even if she's pretending to be indifferent. Another powerful reaction is competitive awareness. When a man goes silent confidently, a woman subconsciously fears someone else may be receiving the attention she once dismissed. This is not jealousy in the dramatic sense. It's a recognition of value. She remembers that you are desirable, that other women see what she sees, and that your silence may not be emptiness, but redirection. This realization ignites a quiet urgency inside her, especially if she believes she had emotional leverage. As your silence continues, she may shift into re-engagement behaviors. These can range from soft attempts like checking in, complimenting you subtly, asking small questions, to more direct attempts like initiating a deeper conversation or expressing concern. These moves come from a place of wanting to restore balance without feeling exposed. She's trying to inch her way back towards you without signaling her full vulnerability. And finally, when your silence proves stable and unshaken, she reaches a point of emotional recalibration. She starts recognizing your worth in ways she didn't before. She sees your silence not as distance, but as discipline. She sees your absence not as punishment, but as value. She sees you not as a man who needs her attention, but as a man whose attention must be earned. This is the moment where attraction shifts from passive to active, where curiosity becomes desire, where uncertainty becomes longing. Your silence didn't push her away, it brought her back to herself, and now she must decide what to do with the emotions she can no longer ignore. In the end, everything comes down to one undeniable truth. A woman's interest is never revealed when things are easy. It is revealed in the moments where emotional pressure rises, where uncertainty appears, where silence enters the dynamic. Most men misunderstand these moments. They believe silence is defeat, distance is rejection, and withdrawal is abandonment. But a Stoic man knows better. He knows that when a woman pulls back, she is not testing his ability to chase her. She is testing his ability to remain himself. Throughout this journey, you've seen how powerful your silence truly is when it comes from a place of emotional control. You learned that ignoring her is not about punishing her or manipulating her. It's about reclaiming your frame, your equilibrium, your self-respect. It is the conscious decision to stop investing in a dynamic where your value is taken for granted. And instead of collapsing into insecurity, you stood still. You stayed grounded. You allowed her silence to become her experience rather than yours. This act alone flips the entire psychological structure. What she intended for you starts happening to her. The questions she wanted you to ask begin haunting her own mind. The imbalance she created begins weighing on her shoulders. The uncertainty she tried to introduce becomes her emotional burden, not yours. Through your silence, you showed her a truth she didn't expect. You are not a man who loses himself over temporary emotion. You are a man who leads himself regardless of who follows. And this is exactly where attraction thrives. Because a woman can only truly desire a man she cannot easily control. She can only admire a man who does not break when challenged. She can only feel pulled toward a man whose absence speaks louder than his words. Ignoring her with stoic strength creates the emotional mirror she cannot escape. It forces her to confront what she feels, what she fears, and what she risks by staying distant. It reveals the difference between men who cling and men who grow. It shows her that your attention is not something she can play with or assume. It is something she must earn. And once she realizes this, her mindset shifts from control to connection. She begins to see you differently. She begins to feel differently. She begins to move differently, not because you pressured her, but because your silence awakened the part of her psychology that recognizes real